Your mid-mornings done right with the A-Team. Area code.
FM Rewind. File 88.1.
We're getting into what we call my Judith Monday, and we take a look at the vital role of men in advancing women's leadership, not just in our country. Remember that as well. We were celebrating on the 8th of March, which was Saturday, celebrating Women, International Women's Day, recognizing and also just absorbing the day itself and understanding what it was all about. But how do we include men into these conversations? What role do men play when it comes to advancing women's leadership? Judith Haupt joins us on the line to assist us with this conversation. Contract SA Managing Director, as we speak all things in honor of International Women's Day. Judith Haupt, an insightful article, Women in Leadership, the crucial role of men, underscores the systematic barriers women face and calls for men to actively champion gender equity. Now, through personal anecdotes and the stark statistics, Haupt highlights how biases and structural inequality persists even as women's empowerment programs succeed in fostering confidence and ambition as well. We're going to be looking at some of the key points where workplaces, how biased they can be, how workplaces can be biased as well. A qualified mother's experience with headhunters reveals lingering stereotypes that actually get to penalize women for caregiving roles as well. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Judith. Welcome to Area Code.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be part of this discussion.
Quite an interesting article that we've come across, Women in Leadership, the crucial role of men. You know, it has also sparked a very important conversation, and I'd like to believe that some conversations we haven't really tapped into because people are just having conversations in their own designated areas. But we were fortunate enough to bring this conversation on air and continue this conversation with various listeners. Could you maybe start by sharing what inspired you to write this particular article when it comes to the role of men in advancing women's leadership?
Absolutely, yeah. So I've been working and feel very blessed that I've been doing some work with women in leadership for many years. And a lot of what we did for quite a significant amount of time was work with women directly. So get women to realize, why is it important that we are in leadership? What holds us back? What are our obstacles? How do we get more confident? How do we put ourselves out there more? And that was very, very rewarding work and very interesting work. And there was a puzzle piece missing because we did that work and the women were all like revved up and were happy to be ambitious and go for their careers and had sort of a new outlook on their career. But what happened was, again and again, we realized they are part of a system that is quite set in its ways. And a big part of that system are obviously men and everyone else. So the people outside of the women who kind of contribute to the system, and then a lot of structures and policies that almost hold things in place and don't allow for a lot of change. So we realized we really need to pull in certainly the men in the workplaces for this conversation so that they also know what's going on and that they can contribute to making a change.
I want to also look at the various systematic barriers women face. Maybe bring some brief highlight to the conversation in terms of the key challenges women encounter in leadership roles, especially when it comes to South African context, which is not something that's taboo to South Africa only, but it can also be quite a global experience to other women as well.
No, absolutely. So I think there is, so firstly, just in general, and this is worldwide, and of course there are different nuances in the different cultures, but I think there is, we often talk about unconscious bias, and there's actually inside of unconscious bias, there's a particular patterns of gender bias that happen that women experience, particularly at work. I don't want to go through all of them, but I'll give you some examples. So again and again, research has shown that women have to prove themselves more than men. in order to be deemed competent. It's just something that's ingrained in us, that when we think of a highly competent person, when we think of, there's certain tests as well, when we think of surgeons or lawyers or just people in very high, presidents in high-powered positions, we tend to think of men. And that's a good example of how we tend to assign competence to men much more easily to women, which means that women in the workplace have to prove themselves again and again. They have to show that they're competent, whereas we tend to give men more benefit of the doubt. So that's one of the systemic barriers. There's another one that is around women being showing masculine traits or feminine traits, what we would consider typically masculine or feminine. And women are on a bit of a tightrope there, because if they are too feminine, they are, maybe sometimes joked about, looked at, but then also not really deemed very credible. They might be liked, but not very respected. And then when women show up more masculine, with more masculine traits, maybe a bit more assertive, maybe a little bit more vocal, a bit more stern, they are very quickly considered, a bit bitchy or arrogant or too confident. And some of those things happen to women but don't happen to men.
Yeah.
There's certain questions that women get asked that men don't get asked. Like if a woman has a couple of, let's say, 3-4 children, women tend to, and are in a high-powered role, women tend to get asked, hey, how do you manage this? How do you marry family and kids and your high-powered role? Whereas dads of 3-4 children don't get asked that. So there's certain things that just limit our perception of what women are capable of and who they are in the workplace.
I think you're absolutely right when it comes to your point of questioning and how people address different questions to different genders, and, really glorify moments of being able to juggle so much as opposed to somebody who's not able to juggle so much. And it just becomes a very huge comparison that also tackles and strains the industry itself for people emotionally, or women emotionally as well.
Yeah.
You've also shared the shocking statistics, and I want us to really zoom into this, that women earn 35% less than men for equal work in South Africa. What do you think are the root causes of this wage gap, and how can men use their positions and their power to bridge this gap, to address this inequality, to make sure that there's also an equilibrium amongst and across all genders?
So I think there are a couple of reasons for that. So the one is, and it's we all don't want to admit this, I think, but it is quite shocking that somehow connected to what I was saying earlier, that we might not see women as competent, somehow in workplaces there's a tendency to sort of not offer particularly high salaries because maybe the woman has had kids and has had maternity leave 2 or 3 times and hasn't completed certain amounts of strategic projects or something. And suddenly we feel, that woman, we can maybe give her a little bit on the lower end of our salary spectrum because, she's missed out on certain career milestones. So that's the one aspect, that women are often offered a different salary. But the other thing is that women don't negotiate their salary as strongly as men do. And that also has to do with how women are, I guess, socialized, in that we're socialized into being pleasing and helpful and kind and not being too forceful, and often grow up having doubts about our own value, our own competence in the world or in the workplace. And therefore maybe don't go in as confidently and say, actually, yes, I do think I need this kind of salary. So we don't negotiate as hard. And we also don't really, let me actually leave it at that. We don't believe that we deserve it at times.
I think you're absolutely right. And I also just might add in the point of fear, the point of fear, fearing to lose your job, fear of the unknown, what might happen after that when you continue to put your foot down and persist. These are constant things that are happening. And the more we don't talk about it and express ourselves, the more we allow room for an increase constantly between women and men when it comes to the wage gap that we are faced with. One of the most compelling points you also make is about the mental load. You make a fair argument that women carry a lot when it comes to household. Maybe let's bring in men in terms of a support structure when supporting their partners by sharing this load more equitably, at home, and just being able to be able to share equally, and even if it's not equally, but being able to just relieve you of a load in particular and not necessarily carry everything at once.
Yeah. Can I actually add one thing about the wage gap? Because I think I forgot one important point,
Please
and I
go
think
ahead.
it's important to also mention, and then I'll go into the mental load. I think the wage gap percentage is also so incredibly high because women tend to have lower paid professions. So that's the other thing, and this goes into the link of often caregiving professions. If you think of social workers, you think of teachers, you think of nursery school teachers, you think of people who work in old age homes, and you think of domestic workers in South Africa. The majority of the lower paid jobs are females, are held by females as well, which also, of course, contributes to the 35% lower salary. So that's the one thing about the wage gap. But the mental load, yes, it's such a tricky topic, Pretty, because it is so deeply, deeply ingrained. So women, even when they have high-powered careers, if they have families, but even if they don't have children, but they have pets, and we all have parents, right? Women tend to hold more of that mental load, of that caregiving work that is needed at home. And it's not only that they do all that work, but they hold it all together. So they're basically the project managers of the family. Because sometimes men say, no, but I do grocery shopping, or I do cook, or no, I do drop my kids off at school. Yes, absolutely. But who has organized the whole roster for the week, or who does the birthday party planning, and who buys the presents for all the other kids' birthday parties? So that's why it's called mental load. And yeah, the recommendation is to try and share the mental load, not only the physical load, meaning maybe you as the dad are responsible for all the doctor's appointments of your children. But it's very, very tricky, I do want to say, because I know of men who want to really be real partners to their women, to their wives, and share the load equally. But I'll give you an example. I know of one dad, and he actually wants to get in more involved in the organization of his kid's life. But what he finds is that when he takes his toddler to a birthday party where parents are still staying, he's usually the only dad, which is a little awkward, right? And then only moms, and he's the only dad, and everyone goes, oh, so nice that you're here, No one says that to a mom. And then he also finds that, for instance, when it comes to logistical organization of extramurals or lift clubs, that society, so the other people in society and the other moms and dads, but most dominantly moms, assume that it's the mom. So then often his wife still gets the WhatsApp about the organization because they don't know that it's the dad organizing it. Yeah. And no one assumes that it's the dad organizing. So it takes a lot of commitment from families and from dads to also put it out into the world. Listen, I'm responsible for this. Please be in touch with me around that and not my wife.
Yeah. That is so interesting. I think it just goes back to the mental assistance as well when it comes to the capacity that so many people can carry. What an interesting thing, because it's not an everyday activity that you see men really investing themselves in all of that. Let's speak about the workplace in particular.
Yeah.
There's a different culture that is carried around in the workplace, whether it might be from disrespect, bullying, undermining, the list is endless. Let's speak about what men can do better in that environment to make sure that, I don't want to use the term accommodate, because it then sounds like it's a favor, but to just make the environment a bit more conducive for both women and males, especially around flexibility, paternity leave, career advancement. There's so much that we can bring into the table.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there is a lot we can do, all genders, actually. So I think, you mentioned paternity leave. I mean, I think one example is parental leave. So fathers, for instance, are entitled to 10 days of unpaid paternity leave in South Africa. I don't think all fathers take it, because I think there's also a certain pressure at work. Really? Is your wife not home? Why do you need to be there for 10 days? So that's the one thing. So it's kind of being courageous and saying, no, look, I want to be there because I really want to be there for the beginning of my child's life, and I want to support and be there fully, not only support, but just really play my part. The other thing is a lot of people get 4 months parental leave from work. And if you think about it, it's mainly women who take that. However, you actually, by law, you can decide between a mom and a dad who takes what. And technically, you could share that parental leave. But I think what happens is it takes a lot of courage, because so few men do it. It would take a lot of courage to stick up your hand and say, actually, I want to take parental leave. So that's the one thing around policies like that. The other one is just being very watchful and mindful around what happens. So, for example, if there's a conversation about giving a strategic project to someone, and maybe there's a comment, let's not give her this project because, you know what, she's got 3 kids at home and it's a bit difficult for her to travel. For you to come in and say, actually, can we check that out with her before we make that assumption? She might really want to. I believe she's quite ambitious, and she might want to take that next step in her career. And then the other one would be to defy certain stereotypes as well, if there are sexist jokes made at work, for instance, to interject and say, actually, I don't think that's fair. I think that's not funny. Once we get hooked on seeing what happens in the workplace, we notice so much. Women get interrupted more than men. So if men know that, you can watch out for it. And then you could say things like, hey, I just wanted to go back to what Yolanda was saying earlier. Yolanda, I believe you didn't quite finish what you were saying, just very gently leading it back. Or sometimes ideas get repeated by men that were voiced by women before. It's called the stolen idea. I know it all sounds really strange, but these are all things that have been found again and again. And if you're noticing it as a man, that an idea was actually mentioned before and now it's picked up, you could say, hey, Mark, that's so great that you're picking up on Nosipo's idea, which she mentioned earlier. I really think we should go for it. So subtle or not so subtle comments to show, hey, this is not okay. we need to take people seriously.
Yeah, such an interesting conversation. Sadly, we are out of time, but just very quickly and briefly, looking at the broader picture, how important is it for men to actually advocate for the diversity when it comes to the likes of the top of the chain, top of organizations? What impact can this have, especially when it comes to economic system as a whole?
Yeah, it's hugely important. It's hugely important. I mean, we know that companies have higher net profit margins when there are more than 30% women in top leadership. We know that women in leadership have huge impact on engagement, on the output of companies, on innovation because of diversity. I think it's just really, really crucial. And on a more personal note, I think our businesses are structured in very masculine ways. I think we've pushed very strongly for many, many decades. And I think we need a different energy. I don't think that we're doing that well. And I think we need to shift outlook in our economy to bring in different qualities to really be sustainable as organizations in today's world.
Judith, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been a pleasure having this chat with you.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you very much. And that's Judith Haupt, who speaks to us from the Contract SA Managing Director, speaking about an article that really highlighted some of the vital roles when it comes to men in advancing women's leadership in these spaces.
Area Code, weekdays,
9 a.m. to 12 p.m.